All right, today we're going to look at a reality that's, well, it's pretty hidden, even though it's happening right in plain sight. We're talking about entire villages in India where sex work isn't just a job, it's become a generational trade, passed down from mother to daughter. It's a really complex story about poverty, history, and, some really surprising social dynamics. I mean, listen to that. That quote from a young woman named Rashna, it just cuts right to the heart of it all, doesn't it? For so many women in these communities, this isn't about choice. It's about what they feel is literally the only way to survive. So let's start with where this is all happening. And what's really striking is the location. We're talking just 3 hours away from India's bustling capital, New Delhi. You drive that short distance and you enter a world that operates under a completely different set of rules, a world shaped by its own traditions and intense economic pressures. And let's be clear, this isn't some small, isolated thing. In villages like Gumanpura in Rajasthan, sex work has become, for all intents and purposes, an institutionalized profession. It's the main way hundreds of thousands of women make a living. It's a reality that has incredibly deep roots in the community. Okay, so let's take the story of one woman, Anita. She earns about 750 euros a month. Now, you might hear that and think, wow, that's a pretty significant amount of money in rural India, and you'd be right. But this income doesn't mean she's wealthy. Far from it. She says she only got into this profession out of sheer poverty. Her goals? To build a home, help get her sister married, and just put food on the table. And that right there brings up a huge question, doesn't it? If the earnings can be that high, why are these families still so often trapped in poverty? Well, the answer, it's a vicious, vicious cycle of debt. It seems completely counterintuitive, right? How on earth can you have high earnings and yet be stuck in debt that passes from one generation to the next? The thing is, the answer isn't about the choices people are making. It's about the system they're trapped in. So here's how the trap is set. First off, because sex work isn't considered a legitimate job, no bank will give them a loan, period. So what do when you need money? You have to turn to local lenders. And these lenders, they charge absolutely crippling interest rates. It becomes almost impossible to ever pay it back, so the debt just gets passed down to your kids. And that is the human cost of the system. Remember Rashna? She started when she was just 15. Why? Because her mother's earnings just weren't cutting it. She saw her little siblings having to beg for food, and, well, she felt like she had no other choice. She had to become the family's breadwinner. Okay, so you might be wondering, why not just get a different job? And that's a fair question. To really get that, we have to look beyond the money. We need to dig into the deep, historical roots of the stigma they face, and it's all tied directly to India's caste system. You see, the women in these communities, they belong to specific nomadic tribes, like the Nuts, the Badia, and the Kanjar. And historically, these groups have been placed at the absolute bottom of India's social ladder. We're talking centuries of being pushed to the margins. And this stigma, it was actually formalized, made official, back in 1871. The British colonial government passed something called the Criminal Tribes Act, which literally branded them as criminals just for being born into these tribes. Now, that act was eventually repealed after India gained its independence, but the social stain, that never really washed away. And what's really tragic is that before all of this, these communities had this incredible cultural history as traveling performers. They were dancers, jugglers, acrobats, magicians, but their traditional way of life was pretty much dismantled, and it pushed them towards the only economic path that seemed to be left open to them. And this quote, it just goes to show how that historical stigma is still painfully alive today. A man from the community says people won't even stand or walk next to them. Think about that. That kind of social exclusion makes finding any other kind of decent work, yeah, pretty much impossible. But here's where the story takes a really fascinating and complex turn. Inside these communities, a major social shift is happening. So while they face all this stigma from the outside world, the women's role as the main providers creates this strange paradox of power within their own families. And this captures that paradox perfectly. On one hand, you have the absolute pain of abuse. I mean, Rashna tells a story of being beaten black and blue by a client who wouldn't even pay her. But on the other hand, you have a male family member saying, our women are strong. They support the family. They call the shots. Both of these things are true at the same time. So what you have is this really interesting reversal of traditional gender roles. The women are the ones earning the money, the ones building the homes, the ones paying off the family debts. And the men, well, they often take on the domestic roles, doing chores, raising the kids, though, yeah, sometimes they also act as pimps. But within the family unit, it's the women who hold the economic power and the respect. So, with this incredibly complex mix of debt, stigma, and this strange internal power dynamic, is there any way to break the cycle? Well, inside the community, they believe the answer is yes, and it comes down to one thing: education.
And this is where we meet a real agent of change. His name is Gudu Nagar. He's a teacher, and he grew up in this exact same community. He had his own relatives in the sex trade, but he taught himself to read and write, and now he is absolutely dedicated to giving the next generation a different path forward.
And you know what? It's actually working. In the families that have really embraced education, the results are just incredible. One girl joined the police force. A boy is now a lab technician. 2 girls are studying to become doctors. And here's the most important part. In those families, not a single woman works as a sex worker. The cycle is literally being broken.
And that brings us to this young girl, Nancy. Her dream? She wants to be an air hostess one day. You know, it's a simple dream, but what it represents is this profound, powerful shift. It's the hope that the next generation won't be defined by their circumstances, but by their own aspirations for a totally different future.